Yeah.
Are you going to hold the tabs?
Well, I can put them down.
No, I like that. No, just why not?
I'm going to hold them for now.
Okay, welcome to the Dharma Doctor podcast. I'm Katie, and I'm here with Brad Mosel and Lizzie Donovan. And we're super excited today to have her here. Lizzie is a counselor here in Boise, Idaho, and one of the initial investors in Dharma Doctor. So, yeah, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I like that you're holding the tabs today.
I'm happy that I can.
Yeah, right?
A long time in the making.
Pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Very
And we
cool.
have the app open, so you can kind of just like use the tabs and relax, get ready for the podcast today. So one of the things we think has been kind of working with these podcasts is just having our guests tell us a little bit about themselves and also just your definition of EMDR therapy, because it's pretty interesting how kind of different practitioners and counselors and therapists all describe it differently.
How we all look at it.
Yeah.
Great. So my name's Lizzie Donovan. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in Idaho. I've been previously licensed in Colorado and Alaska. And I've been a counselor since 2004.
Okay. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Seattle.
Seattle.
Yep.
Okay.
Moved to Colorado for school.
Okay.
Right down the street from the first Costco.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right down the street from the first Costco on 4th Avenue. And in terms of EMDR, I think about it in terms of how we look at nervous system health. So I look at it in terms of how do we move experiences that have happened in the past that our nervous system is continuing to respond to. How do we help our nervous system know that it's all done? And I think EMDR is a really great tool for that. It's a way for helping the unconscious become conscious so that it can become processed and sometimes reprocessed, sometimes processed for the first time, and allow it to live where it actually lives, which is in the past. Our nervous system is, my experience has been, always trying to protect us. Mm-hmm. It sometimes gets the timing wrong. And I feel like EMDR helps the nervous system figure out what's the timing of this, because it gets fired up really, really well. It does not calm down as easily when it continues to perceive a threat. And so I think it helps the nervous system sort that information, figure out, okay, this is now the present. The present is different than the past, and allows the nervous system to process that experience and be done with it.
And do you see a lot of your patients? Do you help them? Like, is EMDR sort of a therapy that you use?
I do use EMDR, yes. I don't exclusively use it, but I do use it.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit? It's Entrepreneur Week, right?
Exciting.
Here in Boise.
Yeah.
And
Boise
that is
Entrepreneur
actually
Week.
how you two met.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like almost a year ago. Almost a year ago we met for the first time. I got a text message from, I think it was from you, actually, that was like,
Just
hey,
direct.
Just direct. It was like, hey, I heard about you. Do you want to get coffee? And it's one of those miracles of Boise, I think, which is that Boise is so small that when you go to an event like Boise Entrepreneur Week, you very quickly connect with people who are doing the things or in similar veins. Like it self-sorts pretty quickly. And so I think, Lizzie, you had talked with somebody that you didn't even really know.
Never had met.
And I had previously spoken, I think it was a venture capital group I think they were based out of Utah, but I had previously spoken with him and shown him a very early prototype of these tabs we had. And then, we were able to connect and get coffee almost a year ago. And I pitched her on this crazy idea of building a bilateral stimulator that, was going to be consumer facing. So it was a personal tool, and that it was going to have access to this app so it could be integrated and with, a high degree of control. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be discreet. You could customize speed and intensity. You could potentially have pre-recorded, guided sessions. We could do interviews with thought leaders, and you could use it for telehealth. And that was at the time just this idea. I mean, we had sort of this form function down, but we hadn't really done it. And Lizzie was immediately supportive and said, "All right, how do we make these? Like, how do we make it happen?" And from my chair, it was one of the first huge confidence boosts, because her experience.
Somebody was into it, yeah.
And
I
your
got
experience
so
as a counselor.
excited.
Well, and tell me how you were at Boise Entrepreneur Week. Is it something you had been involved in before? Or?
I actually didn't even end up going. I got too busy with work, unfortunately. But I had invested in someone else who had participated.
Okay.
And so they had encouraged me to go. And so they had gotten me a pass or whatever you get. And unfortunately, I got too tied up at work. But you can look at people's profiles. And I must have reached out to the venture capitalist in Utah. And he and I had probably an email exchange, I would imagine. My memory is not the best. But he said, yeah, I don't really have much for you.
Yeah.
But you should talk to this guy, Brad.
Okay.
And, I kind of explained my philosophy of investing, which is really, really different than most people's philosophies of investing. And I think that's why he started to point me in that direction. So you were the only person I met out of that whole week that I didn't even attend.
Yeah.
But it was, I love that Boise has it. I love that there's a space for that where people can kind of come together, support each other, kind of do this cross-referencing of like, oh, you don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to this other person.
Yeah.
Love that. And I was thrilled when I met Brad. I was so excited that, I really believe in investing in very practical solutions that solve very real problems. And this just Dharma doctor felt like that.
How would you describe your investing philosophy?
I was just going to ask that.
My investing philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you're...
Oh, goodness.
When we go back to this history, and I know more about this, but... So you are a licensed counselor, but you also have spent a lot of time in the business world.
Yes, I guess it depends on how you frame a lot of time. But I was raised by a serial entrepreneur. So, we were talking earlier about first jobs. I was 7 when I started counting quarters. That was my first job. So I was raised with this very entrepreneurial spirit. I was also raised, the other side of my family is very public service oriented. So my grandfather was a public servant. My mom also served for the county health department. So I was raised by this like dual entrepreneur, be of service, do something creative and innovative, make it be of service.
Yeah.
And professionally, I've chosen to become a counselor. And I did have a period of time where I was working for a business doing something completely different. But when I transitioned out of that back into counseling, I realized I still wanted to be taking kind of this business mindset that I had developed and be putting it to use in ways that are good for mental health, that are good for, we have so many problems that need to be solved. We have so many ways that we have grown that haven't really grown to be of service to most people. They've maybe benefited a few people. And so my philosophy on investing, or coming out of having done this other business thing, going back into being a counselor, was to keep that part of my mind. Like, to me, there's just so much creativity in solving some of these problems, and that gets me super excited. So, what was the question? What's my philosophy?
Yeah, what's your investing philosophy?
My investing
I think you
philosophy.
kind of answered it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have multiple, right? So I have to save for retirement, just like
Yep.
everybody else. I'm going to have to have long-term health someday. I just broke my ankle, so I'm acutely reminded of what healthcare costs are right now. So, I have a traditional IRA. I have the regular savings. But I do feel some commitment and obligation to investing in things that will make, hopefully, at least hold out the hope for the world to be a bit better of a place. We've created a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of capital floating around that perpetuates those problems. And even if I don't get it right, I want to be putting my money into things that, there might be a chance of things getting better.
Yeah.
People having better nervous systems, the ocean not being so toxic, power not being so toxic.
Yeah.
So that's my investing philosophy. And I generally like to invest because I don't have, I'm not a venture capitalist. I don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
I look for people where like $50,000 or $70,000 or $25,000 might make a difference.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where $50,000 doesn't make a difference
Right.
at all. But there are places where it does. And, I have time, so I can do that. Big venture capitalists, they can't do it in those increments. It just doesn't make sense. But, I can meet people like Brad and figure out, could a little bit of money make a difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has.
And it has. Yeah,
You're
I'm
holding it in your hands. Pretty
Pretty
wild.
excited.
So what was like, you said when you met Brad, it was instantly like felt like a good match.
Yes.
What was it about that?
I think it was actually before I even met him. I think I was maybe reading your LinkedIn profile, or I don't know. I was doing a little cyber stalking.
Yeah.
Good. As any good investor should.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I think, I think it's the thing that really inspired me is your work with kids and your commitment to making something more accessible. I think we share that. I don't work exclusively with kids anymore.
Okay.
Excuse me. But before I had my own, I did. And, this idea that kids are this captive audience, they go to school every day, and that we could introduce something, you could introduce something, that you have this passion and this heart for allowing kids to learn about their nervous system health and to learn just basic good self-care. EMDR should not be, it's a therapeutic tool.
Yep.
Right? But bilateral movement has been something that we should all be doing all the time. And, we should, if we walk to school, we would get more of that.
Yep.
And so we've taken it out of our environment. And to me, as Brad was talking and his work with kids, and especially kids who maybe could really benefit from some more nervous system health, I just got fired up. I just thought, okay, well, this is a place to put some energy. His heart's in the right place. I guess that's what I sift for is, maybe this isn't the thing, although I think it is.
Yeah.
I knew his heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
And when your heart's in the right place, you kind of can fall down and then tailor to how do I still meet the goal? He wasn't chasing money. He was solving a problem. He needed money to solve that problem.
Right.
Which is really different than what some people with a startup are doing. They're trying to figure out how to make money. He was trying to figure out how to help kids regulate their nervous system.
Yeah.
And that, I could get teary about it.
For
just
sure.
the same way I did when I met him. That's what we need.
Right.
We need people who are committed to, helping kids be healthy and safe in their bodies.
Yeah. We talk about the accessibility piece so much, right? Because there's such a hurdle for mental health care in general, mental health care even more so. And so the tabs feel like something that can help you right now. And I think especially I'm as a parent of young kids and there really isn't a lot that feels like it can help you right now. Everything feels like it has a really big hurdle. And so just something that is accessible to anyone and is affordable. And my dream would be that it's in every kid's backpack, right? Start them earlier, have those tools where you understand how to regulate your body or just have some way to help, because we have all this language for it, which is really interesting, I think. Like you said earlier, we're the generation of
the therapy generation.
Yeah, exactly. And so our kids are around this language all the time. And so the more tools that can be available, it's great.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very heartfelt war. I'm tearing up. But the idea that EMDR talks about how these emotions get stored in our body, and our nervous system doesn't always get the timing right. I loved that. That's not something that we teach to kids necessarily. We don't really talk about how things get stuck until much later down the line when you're dealing with sort of the repercussions of that stuckness, right? The consequences, they compound year over year over year, and we don't really get to see that compounding until there's a problem that's been so significant that we then have to go back to see what happened and when that path got broken. And so, even in our earlier conversations, talking about how to create inflection points and make, these tools more accessible earlier on changes that whole trajectory, right? It makes it possible to avoid a lot of those consequences. And a lot of the therapy generation language that we talk about, we talk about anxiety, depression. Sometimes we're mistaking the symptoms for the disease, right?
Absolutely.
Where, these expressions are symptomatic of what was a dysregulated nervous system based on something that's stored. So yeah, working with kids early on gives us the greatest possible impact of giving a tool that they can use throughout the rest of their lives. Because life keeps happening too. We still deal with things on a daily basis, but giving those tools earlier.
And normalizing the use of tools, that it's not something like wrong with you, that it's like something we all sort of deal with. And so I think that's gotten better. It's not, there's not the stigma in going to see a counselor as there what it used to be. But I think for kids, it's thinking like there's something wrong with me. And so when you're learning those tools, it's like, well, we all kind of deal with that for different reasons, right? We can all get like snagged on something for various reasons.
I'm actually really glad you hit on that point because Brad touched on it too. This idea that, our nervous system is usually trying to protect us. And it is a normal response to a situation that our nervous system isn't necessarily set up for. So our nervous system is more set up for like maybe being chased by a tiger or something, right? Let's channel Peter Levine here. So we're more set up for an acute threat, but that doesn't really fit our current environment.
Right.
So then people think there's something wrong with them. And that accumulation, right? So stress, this is the way I think about the tappers. Stress comes in and stress is meant to go out.
Yep.
But what we do in our current culture is we accumulate stress. It comes in, we store it, we become the reservoir. And then, yes, anxiety and depression, in my opinion, are symptoms frequently.
Yep.
People then think that's something that's wrong with them, like you said. But really, it's just this little cue. It's this little thing saying, hey, your reservoir is full. Your rubber band's been stretched for too long. Whatever, sorry, I think in metaphors sometimes.
Yeah, same.
It's all just sort of like that tap on your shoulder, like, hey, pay attention, something's going on. And we've somehow made that mean that there's something wrong with us. It doesn't. It means that we have a nervous system.
Right.
And it's either been under stress for too long or we've had a series of circumstances that exceed our capacity to cope. And I think that's kind of what you were touching on, is like this idea that, we use tools to cope. And that's okay. We don't judge a little kid running over to hug their parent or their caregiver or their teacher if they need to ground and settle. And it's just internalizing those skills.
Right.
And then having those skills so that when mom or teacher or someone who cares about us isn't available, we can do that for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think you said too, talking about the way our environment has changed, and especially for kids, like there's, I don't know exactly what the term is, but it's like not even being outside enough. Like they're having these deficits and there's no recess and PE and
nature deficit disorder or something.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about all the ways, going back to just bilateral, right? Which could be just taking a walk or jumping or playing, or those are just decreasing. And so you're storing more stress than you ever have at a younger age, and you're just carrying that right on into the years where you start having a lot of hormonal things, right? And so you see all these teenagers and then coming into young adulthood, and we just don't have like the appropriate outlets.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you bring up this, being an open space or whatever, because it's not, I think stress gets a bad rap. Stress is actually a really important part of being human. My daughter's pediatrician, I think summed it up for me the best. He said, kids need stress the same way they need vaccines. Like if they're never exposed to something, they're not going to develop resiliency to it.
That's a really good way to describe it.
Yeah, I was like, you are brilliant.
Thank you.
He was so brilliant in so many ways. What was my point? What were we talking about?
Oh, just like, I think just...
Oh, the green spaces. Yes. So, I think of it as sensory input.
Yeah.
And so we're getting really intense sensory input that we're not super well built for. So like we get a lot of screen input. Little kids get a lot of screen input. And we're not really well built for that. We're built for looking at horizons and running and jumping and using our proprioception and developing that. And so I think sometimes it's really easy for us to judge these things and be like, if we just went back to whatever.
Which like is never going to happen.
It's not going to happen, right? But it's figuring out what sensory input helps our body regulate. What do we need throughout the course of a day? There's not one that's good or bad. It's just keeping ourselves in balance.
There's this, on the similar note, people are self-regulating no matter what we do, right? I mean, if we don't find healthy ways to cope, people find unhealthy ways to cope.
You got it. And more extreme.
And more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. And, when we look at, the near and dear to my heart is sort of the addiction and, addiction and alcoholism and the epidemic. But when we look at the current fentanyl crisis, what we're finding, I mean, it's directly related, right? Where if you find an unhealthy way, you don't have any other ways, you're going to continue to use the way that you have. And as that gets more and more extreme and more dangerous, like the outcomes get worse and worse.
Yep.
Which is, it's sad. But there's often this fear, or one of the fears that was raised, and is bilateral stimulation safe to use on your own? Or like, is this something that people can use? And I always laugh, because it's
it's the same as walking,
it's
right?
better than
yes,
fentanyl.
Yes.
It's about as natural as it gets.
That's the Dharma doctor, better than fentanyl.
Roberto, we may just cut all this, but really, people are self-regulating by nature. And there's another, I want to kind of ask you about this, is EMDR has this interesting linkage between first identifying, first or worst, or this memory, but then also the belief that gets attached to that memory. There's a whole step where you identify what belief is attached, and I would love to get your perspective on what are beliefs? Like why or like
what are beliefs? Wow.
Well, it's an interesting.
I need a
thing.
degree in philosophy to answer that.
Maybe, but we have these beliefs, and we can change these beliefs too, right? So I'd love to hear stories, or what's your experience with this sort of like reprocessing of a experience and how that changes
Sure.
the belief system?
Can I share a personal experience with that? Would that be
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
I'm hesitant to share anybody else's experience with it, but I can share my own. We talk about core beliefs, and they're things that you believe to be, absolutely true about yourself or about the world. And I had a core belief that developed when I was very young. Usually a lot of times core beliefs come from when we're very young. And it was about my responsibility in the world, that I was more obligated than anyone else to do everything. And if something went wrong, it somehow had to be my fault. Very self-centered. Yeah. But guess what? Children are inherently self-centered. Yes. So when they make these beliefs, sometimes they're a little self-centered. Mm-hmm. And so I had this belief, and I lived out of that belief without really knowing it. Because if someone had said to me, hey, do you know that you live as if you're responsible for everything? I would have been like, what are you talking about? Obviously, I'm not responsible for everything. Yeah. But I did live that way. And I didn't know where it came from. And I didn't know how to get rid of it. But I knew the suffering that it was causing. It was a threat to my own life satisfaction, and it was a threat to other people's autonomy, right? Like, people should and can be responsible for themselves, and yet I would do all this effort, all this work to make it all okay, because in the end it would be my fault if I didn't make it all okay.
It's natural too.
Totally natural.
It's a totally natural development for kids to have this responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I had no idea where it came from. And you're going to probably have to edit this whole thing out because it's too long of a story. But I was actually doing brain spotting. I was at a brain spotting class. So brain spotting is very similar, grew out of EMDR. I think of it more as nervous system regulation tools than I think of EMDR. Even when I think of Dharma doctor, I think of it more as nervous system regulation tools. I don't think of it as, I think of it as bilateral stimulation. I don't think of it as EMDR because I think of that as a very specific tool.
We do too.
Yeah. But I was at a brain spotting training, and I volunteered to be the, guinea pig or whatever. And I might be putting two experiences together. But at the end of the day, through nervous system regulation and I found out where this belief came from. And in understanding where this belief came from, which, by the way, I still don't even know if the experience was true.
It's just the framing that you had?
It's just the framing. Yeah. So it's an actual experience that I had that I don't actually know what happened. But I lived as if something was a particular way. And I'd be happy to share it with you since you can edit it out. When I was, I don't know, 7-ish, I was in the hospital for about a week with a pretty massive infection in my face and in my tooth. And from this point forward, I don't know what everything I'm about to say, I don't know if it's true or not.
Okay. But it was true for you.
It was I don't even know if it was true for me. I don't even know.
Oh, you lived as if, I mean,
I lived as if all this was true.
Right.
Yeah. That's
So,
the important part.
I mean, I could delineate this part I know is true, or at least I think is, and this part I'm unsure of. But I had a roommate, and my family was there all the time. You know, I think they slept there. I don't remember being alone really.
Yeah.
And I remember my roommate, I don't remember seeing his family except one day, and they all came on that same day. And it was like the biggest party. And I was like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is fun. Like, it was kind of exciting. I remember there were balloons, Mylar balloons. And at some point, my roommate disappeared. And I didn't know where he went. And I could even cry right now. And I thought he died.
Like it was just...
And I have no idea if he did or not.
Right.
But I lived as if he did.
Yeah.
And I lived as if he died and I lived. And now I have an obligation.
Like a responsibility.
Sorry, I actually need tissues.
Yeah.
I was not expecting to need tissues. I have them right here, but I'm not going to wipe my face. But, you know, from that, you know, so as I kind of traced back this, like, where did this weird, like, I never would have known it came from that.
Right.
And I don't even know what happened to this kid.
Right.
I mean,
He
he could
could've
be like
just been
living this
discharged.
super healthy, satisfying life. I don't know what his diagnosis was. I don't know anything. But I lived as if me living through that meant that I had to, like, work harder and do better and put all this effort in. And, you know, in some ways it served me really well. And I think this is the important thing. You know, I say the word trauma, but from our trauma, a lot of us do really good things.
Right.
It's not all bad. But there were ways that it was not serving me. And not being conscious of that made me compulsive about something.
Okay.
That when I have choice about it, I can be very effective and, you know, helpful and whatever.
Perspective around it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when I'm compulsive about it, well, then I take away other people's agency.
Yeah.
And I take away my own, and I don't respect my own self in my own time. And so, you know, through that process of understanding my own core belief, you know, I got a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
I got a lot of freedom. And I don't know if that even answers your question.
Oh, that was incredible.
No, I think it's such a good example, because I think even while you're telling that story, I'm like, those are the, you know, some of the personality traits that you have or are successful. You're like, where does that come from? And so often we just, like you're saying, like you just blow by all of that self-examination so often, especially with kids, right? It's just like act a certain way, or you get more attention if you're a good kid. And I'm dealing with this with my daughter right now. I have two little girls, and my oldest is like your very typical oldest type A, right? Where she has this like control of things, and she like loves getting picked to be like the line leader, and she always like stays after and helps clean up. And I'm like, like that. So, and she's always really proud of herself. She's got like a stack of like the forms you get for like doing extra good things. And although I'm like so proud of her, I also am sort of that way. And I see the success that's brought me, but also the people pleasing responsibility that just carries with you all the time. And I'm like, oh, it starts when you're really little. And you get that positive feedback all the time around the things like you're saying, like those sort of things serve us pretty well in life in the way that things are set up. And I think part of that is because self-care is not really all that important in our culture, right? Like do for others, get seen for doing those things, be a giver, be a giver, be a giver, but your well kind of isn't super important for it to be filled. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about how it starts when you're so little.
0 to 3. And then 0 to 6.
It's no pressure for
No. I mean, we make a lot of meaning, and, you know, we do but a lot happens before we're even conscious of it.
Yep.
And I think that's the benefit of this bilateral self-management tool is it allows things to be in motion again rather than stagnant and stuck.
That's an interesting way to describe it. It's
Bring
something that
things
you
back.
can have a role in,
Yeah.
right? It's not just like this is your story and these are the things that happen to you. I just feel like it gives people ownership, right? That's what tools are. It just gives you a way to have some control over the way you're feeling.
One of the when I was teaching, working with a lot of students in these sort of alternative education environments, one of the beliefs that I frequently found, and it just makes sense, but a lot of these students came from very broken families and very foster care systems, and they have this deep belief, and I can relate because I think I had a similar one and had reprocessed through it, but it's that authority figures can't be trusted, right? That anybody that has this authority role is eventually going to let me down. And when we bring that belief that they've inherited so early on, right? There's kind of this two sides of the coin. Some of these students are the most autonomous and just absolutely brilliant self-starters on their own, taking care of themselves at such a young age.
They're islands.
They're islands, but they've also blocked themselves off from all of the resources, or they're not willing to access any of the resources to help them make that transition over. And it's heartbreaking to see, because that there's this self-sabotage element. That there's this belief that's just preventing the utilization or the access to the resources, and simultaneously you see all this strength that has come from their own individual development. And sometimes I think I always had this fear that if I let go of some of my demons, it's almost like the tortured artist, right? Where it's like, if I let go of the demons, I'll lose the talent,
right?
And the reality is exactly what Lizzie was just saying, but it's not that you lose the talent, it's that you become conscious and you become capable of making a decision. You can engage with it or you cannot engage with it. It's no longer compulsive.
Yep.
And that's a important distinction. It means that we can still have access to all the positive and simultaneously move into new spaces, have new experiences, have different relationships that allow us to break free from those old patterns. So it's
like lets you drive.
It's deep.
Yeah.
It's real deep. It guides human behavior.
Something you were talking about, Brad, about different people having similar experiences but kind of turning out differently. I think this is, I can worry about things that are outside my control just like anybody else can. And sometimes that's one of my worries about, as trauma has become a conversation that we're more willing to have. This idea that somehow what happened to us somehow predicts who we're going to be. Like if I could erase that, I would.
Yeah.
Because some of us have had experiences that people might call traumatic, and they have propelled some of the best problem solving. They have propelled some of the deepest empathy, some of the most kind and caring and compassionate care of other people. And some of us have had bad things happen to us, and we've replicated that. We've gone into the world and we've done harm to other people. And, some of us have maybe not even experienced enough stress, and so then we inflict it upon other people not knowing that we're doing damage.
Yeah.
So this idea that trauma somehow predicts our outcome, if I could change that, I would. Because sometimes it's a lesson. Sometimes it's the thing that helps us learn something about ourselves or about the world. Core beliefs aren't necessarily bad.
Yeah.
It's when we're unconscious and we're being run by them and we're stuck in it that I think that it can cause problems. It can cause dis-ease in our body. But it's not like A plus B equals C.
Yeah.
Humans have never been that simple that I'm aware of. We know out. We I don't know. Even as I'm talking, I'm like, well, do I even believe that? Is it true? But there's so many variables that go into how someone develops a core belief, develops their perception of the world, sees their place in it, and to give people a path. As I'm holding on to these, because I got a little emotional, and so I turned them on. And
good.
Giving people some choice about what am I going to make that mean? Because as a knee-jerk reaction, I made it mean one thing. But what am I going to choose for that to mean? What am I going to choose for that to be in my life? What am I going to do with this? How am I going to let go of this? How am I going to hold on to the parts that have helped me grow?
I think even just like catching those things, like when you can identify them and then seeing how they play out, there's such a freedom. I just think of being a mom, like things that worked for me when I was single or by myself or working in my career. And then now as a mom, like, don't work. And when it can catch me, when I can catch myself in those situations, like trying to control things or have a vision. I just went on a vacation, right? Have a vision of how the family vacation is supposed to go versus what it actually is, right? Like, that's like the best example.
I just got the two mental pictures.
Right. They're very different, in case anyone's wondering. But being able to like move through those is freeing too, where you just can take a breath. And I think that's with bilateral stimulation, right? Where it's the go for a walk if you've exploded, it's use the tabs to recenter yourself. And it's that like pause before action, right? Because I think with the things that we carry from those core beliefs, we just are so reactive all the time. And sometimes it's reactive compulsively in the same pattern all the time to every sort of stimulation that you have that triggers you or snags you, and then being able to just pause. And like, I would hope that is sort of what the tabs can provide, is that just couple seconds sometimes before you react to just catch what you want to do next. Have some ownership in how you want to respond. That's what I always want.
That's a great point. There's another element to this, which is also that people have different sensitivity levels and different nervous systems. And I work with, a variety of different students, or I've worked with a variety of different students, and oftentimes you'll see two people go through the exact same event and have very different responses. And there's, I love this erasing of the idea that we are defined by the events we go through, but it's also, we come to realize that we are uniquely different with our nervous systems, just in the same way that, some people are taller and some people are better athletes. We have different strengths. Physically, there are different sensitivity levels, and providing a space to discuss, or at least accept that well, I guess currently we're calling it neurodivergence is sort of the hip phrase, but the way, bringing light to that also exposes this fallacy that it's so simple, that it's I'm defined by a few key experiences or a few key characteristics. It's much more varied. And, these are all things that we can engage with and have control over and can process when we're willing to look at it, when we're willing to accept it. I've personally, I grew up as a pretty sensitive kid, and in a lot of ways I carried a lot of shame around that, because I could see other friends go through like their first breakup, right? And they were fine. Like, they got through the breakup and then they were going. And I would go through a breakup and it would be like, I am never going to be loved again. Or like, I get to avoid this. Like, I get all these deep fears and beliefs that then govern my behavior. And I could see other people do it with impunity, and I'd be, ashamed that I wasn't like them, right? And it wasn't until, much later that I was able to at least identify that, like, no, I just have this different sensitivity, and I was creating these narratives, and I can change those narratives, and I don't have to live by them. But part of it was also accepting that I had, one of my strengths was also one of my weaknesses, that there's this coin to it, this duality. Just throwing that in there.
I like that.
Mic drop.
Well, you said something I wanted to circle back to, but then I got all excited about, your process. Let me see if I can think about, you were saying something about nervous system. So my thought in response to what you were saying about the nervous system is that we're actually all born with immature nervous systems. And so they also develop through experience, right? So we come into the world, and it's not just preset how our nervous system is going to be. It's also then through experience and what our nervous system holds on to and the learning that it does early in life. And, I think I communicated with both of you, one of my anxieties is like wanting to be able to reference the person who I learned this from and not really remembering where I got it from. So like, if you can like splice in whoever actually said this, but I remember where I was. I can't remember who. I think it was Bessel van der Kolk. And I'm pretty sure.
The one, the only.
The only. It was someone equally brilliant. I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of really, really interesting people, and my strength is not remembering the details.
Hey, but you remember the meat of it, right?
I do. So let me share with you the meat of it, because this is one of those things that really changed how I understood things. And he was sharing about babies in utero to mothers who have been traumatized. And it's normal. We now talk more about heart rate variability. I probably went to this training 10 years ago, so I didn't know much about heart rate variability at that time. But he was talking about how, there's not a really, when you're recently traumatized, your heart rate variability can change. And so there's more like this boom, 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 right? There's not the like boom, boom, boom. And when babies come into the world, whatever the research is, we all sway our babies at 60 to 80 beats per minute or whatever. It happens to coincide with what the in utero experience was for this baby.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So like what we're all sort of just like pre-programmed to do this like rocking. I mean, you can probably time what I'm doing right now. And that's the, we kind of all have this sense. Maybe not all of us. We don't all have to have this. By the way, there's nothing wrong with you if you don't have that.
Yeah.
But if you are in utero, if you're a baby and you're in utero and your experience is not that, well, when you come into the world and someone tries to rock you really rhythmically, it's actually agitating to your nervous system because it's not replicating your sense of home, your in utero experience. It's now this really foreign experience. And so then like quote unquote fussy babies that are like quote unquote difficult to soothe.
Yeah.
Well, maybe their in utero experience was really different than what our
outside the world is.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is where attunement going like, oh, this baby actually does better if I bounce on the ball and I move around a little bit, right? Like where we start to look at this baby and go, oh, their nervous system isn't wired the same way that my, rocking 68 to 80 beats, I'm probably getting it wrong, whatever that is. And part of it is attunement. Part of it is that, you mentioned neurodivergence. Part of it is just like recognizing people, us recognizing ourselves, being willing to say, as adults, I don't like being rocked like that. I like being rocked this other way, and not attaching this meaning that there's something somehow wrong with you. And I think that attachment of like, there's something wrong with me does a lot of damage because it gets in the way of us being able to say, I actually need to be rocked
just do this differently.
Other way. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I think that it's so interesting you say that because I think about, I grew up, I also had so I have two daughters. I grew up as me and just my sister, and my mom's thing was like really fairness was so important. And then as my sister and I are very different people, and now I have these two little girls that are same age apart that my sister and I were, and you start to learn like the fairness thing is such a, you sort of, as like, there's like the mom guilt of like, everything has to be fair and this is the way you do it. But you realize they just actually are different people and you need to treat them differently. And that's the fairness, is that they both get their own experience. And I think it's like exactly what you're saying. Or in relationships, right? Like it's the love language stuff. Like what I like might not be what you like and what my partner needs. And when you constantly are trying to force those things together, you get this conflict instead of just letting each person be different.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Hard to do.
Super hard to do because it means not being focused on ourselves, but being focused on the other person.
Right.
There's this guy named Izzy Kalman. He's I don't know, I think he wrote like the book Bullies to Buddies or something. I don't know. But he also, all these people have changed my life. But he said something about, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He's like, no way.
Yeah.
I don't know what he calls his rule, but his rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them.
Yeah, that's so
right.
True.
Like,
right.
How do we treat people the way they actually want to be treated?
Right. And it requires you to check in with them and actually make the space to hear what someone else wants instead of the assumption that we all have of that better sort of thing.
Right. And even to have this space, I mean, I'm even thinking me as a kid, if someone had said, well, what do you need? I'd be like, are you kidding me? I have no idea. Like, what are you talking about? Why would I know that? But sometimes it's just like, well, let's see if you like if I tuck you in.
Right.
Did you like that? And literally having the space for, did you enjoy that? Or was that too much?
Yeah.
Do you like when I prepare a meal for you, or do you like preparing it for yourself? And giving people the freedom to say, that actually didn't feel nurturing to me.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I think of it too on the flip side in like the business world, right? Like when I look back at the different kinds of bosses I've had, and the ones that have felt great have usually been the ones who are like, what do you need from me? When do you need me to check in? I'm sure it's probably not every day, right? Versus the ones that are just on your case all the time or whatever the situation may be, but you see it's true for every situation, right? And just like, what does that mean to trust other people? And yeah, it's really interesting. It's good. We could all do that more.
Trusting, giving other people the autonomy.
Yeah.
Too, you know, and I think that there is a balance where they treat other people as they would have them treated, but you know, we also, I don't want to go too far on the be hypersensitive to what everybody else needs.
Right.
So, you know, train, because I don't think that that's also the correct answer.
Just in what you're saying, it's kind of what you get to experience, right? Like traditionally what you experience through life versus now what is just available for you to just sort of take in, right? Like I just think of the things as, let's take a middle schooler, right? As you're developing and people are dating, you're starting to learn about like human bodies, the stuff that you had to like hear and then not know what it meant for years versus the things that you are forced, spoon-fed is available from just an information perspective, and like what that does, right? Because it's not a slow burn, I think is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And like, does that have implications to the nervous system not getting to be more mature? Like, do we get too much stimulation at the beginning without having those experiences that kind of help you, those stressors maybe even, that help you learn how to walk through the world?
Okay, we're on the verge of me getting real geeky
Yeah,
and
okay,
real
go.
excited. I'm sorry. We can cut all of this if we need to.
That's what
but
we wanted.
I get really excited. So you're talking about passive observation of information.
What a much better way to say that than us.
But so I'm going back to this bilateral stimulation thing, right? But like, it's things that we're meant to experience. So let's take something like you're observing a building fire, for example. And our nervous system observes a building fire now on TikTok or whatever, and it sits there.
Yeah.
It does nothing. It doesn't move. But if we were observing a building fire in real life, we would be running away. We would be
Helping.
carrying kittens.
Yeah.
We would be getting food for firefighters. We would be maybe a firefighter going into a building wearing a lot of heavy clothes. Like all of that changes our sensory experience.
Yeah.
So there's not this alignment between what I'm seeing and what the sensory experience is, which then causes distress.
Yeah.
You know, if I see a burning building and I'm able to help carry the kittens, well, my nervous system's going to process that really differently than if I'm watching a burning building and I'm just sitting there.
That's so interesting with the amount of information that we get too. 'Cause
We learn to numb.
yeah, oh, for sure. Because when you think of all of the things that are happening and the access to news in general, it's just exhausting, right? And you scroll through social media and you're seeing, you know, the pandemic was happening and Black Lives Matter movement was happening. And, you know, there's all these things happening and you're like, oh my God, I feel so much. And then I just have, I have nowhere to put that information.
Right.
It never makes you feel better. It doesn't, you know, I know for myself, like I feel like I donate money to things when I always say that I'm like like when I'm mad is when I donate, not inspired. I'm like the opposite. And
I'm an angry giver.
yeah, exactly. That's totally how I feel, where I'm like, I'm so mad about this. I'm going to throw some money at the problem, but it doesn't make you feel, it's just interesting. Like there's no release. It's just stressors coming in
Right.
through information. Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance.
There you
Cognitive
go.
That was
dissonance.
the phrase I was looking for, and that is it.
Yes.
You can tell I went to college or graduate school a really long time ago. I couldn't help you out with that one. Cognitive dissonance.
But yeah, I mean, you know, it's on the bad side. It's also on the good side. I mean, when we look at social media and sort of these body perceptions, right, or these things of beauty, you know, we also have to numb ourselves. You know? It's this total access to everything that would normally drive our emotional reactions, right? When you see a burning building, you're supposed to, like, your sympathetic nervous system is supposed to get activated, your fight or flight response. You're supposed to have that fight so that you can engage with it and either get away or get safety or help. And we instead have to suppress it, or like it just numbs. And the same thing's on the positive side. You know, we want to chase after these things that we want, these goals, these ideas. But when there's so many of them, or you're just fed them constantly, you also have to numb. And bringing that from the subconscious, where we're experiencing this at a younger and younger age. You know, kids, you know, 10-year-olds with cell phones are going through this process right now with their nervous system.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to find a way to bring it back out and talk about it and use a tool that can potentially get those juices flowing again, and engage with all the things that have been sort of stored and pushed back. I think a lot about COVID and the way shutting down schools for 2 years affects those nervous systems, and what is the 7-year-old who came home after coming to school and hearing that like the world's closing down and that everybody's in danger. What were the beliefs that they picked up
For sure.
at that time? Because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think anybody really does. But they picked up something. They picked up some sort of belief about the system, some sort of beliefs about the world and themselves, right? What are they
For sure.
supposed to do? And those beliefs are going to shape the way they exist with the world for the next, potentially 50 years, but as they grow into high schoolers and as we see these transformations. And I worry that a lot of that belief or a lot of that system is that people feel more powerless. They feel less capable of doing something or changing something because it's all potentially going to get taken away anyway. And that's really dangerous and scary for me to think about. Side tangent, I guess. But cognitive dissonance, that was the phrase. We're deep. We are deep into the psychological space. The just the passive observer of a very complex world and what that does to the nervous system.
Yeah.
Also, my phone keeps going off because I have to pay for parking.
I know, I'm in the same boat. So maybe, I think also just to sort of like bring it all together or bring it all to a conclusion, I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of language around mental health. There's a lot of things that we're noticing about ourselves, about our kids, about the things we're going to have to face. And I think that's just even in this whole investment story, right? Like going back to the importance of finding things like Dharma Doctor out there that are trying to make a difference is important. And I think it's something that we don't know the impact of what this could be in the future. We don't know the scalability. It's something that we're really trying different, even this podcast, right? Like, would it help people feel, would it help ease them into using something like the tabs in their everyday life because they can listen to us kind of talking about it and destigmatizing it and not making it feel like, you have to be an expert, right? While also not losing the piece that using these tabs in like an EMDR setting with a therapist, with a professional is really valuable too. And I think Dharma Doctor, we talk about these are really a bilateral stimulation tool, and that the EMDR part of it, those go together. A lot of times people are talking about those together. Practitioners are using them together. And we hope that this is sort of like the first step to help you right now. And then depending on what you need, there's a whole world out there of resources. So
yes, I actually really appreciate you hitting on that because I think I've shared with both of you, my concern in general in counseling, people may have one experience and it wasn't positive or it was forced, their parents made them do it or whatever. Yep. And it's, most people, if they went to the doctor and it wasn't super helpful, they don't say, oh, I'm never going to the doctor again. Right.
But they do say that a lot with therapy.
They do say that about therapy and counseling. And so this idea that the tabs are a self-regulation tool.
Yep.
Sometimes just like you might go have a personal trainer, walk you through how to use a machine. It's really, at the gym, it's really helpful to have a counselor help you walk through how do I use these? When do I use these? How do I remember to use them? Because a lot of times when we need them the most, we forget that they're available to us.
Yep.
And, that's where that next step of maybe seeing a counselor, seeing a counselor that provides EMDR or brain spotting can be really helpful.
Yep.
As a next step that, if the tabs aren't helpful for you, maybe finding someone that can help you understand your own nervous system a little bit better.
Yep.
Help you get in touch with your nervous system to find out, well, what else might be helpful? Because just because this tool might not be helpful or just because you don't know how to use it yet, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be or that there's not another tool out there that might be.
Yep. Well, this has been awesome. thank you
Thank
for
you.
going deep on everything. Yeah.
One more story. I gotta tell the story of meeting Jai Wolf.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right.
Jai Wolf. Exciting. We've been talking about, we want to use this song Indian Summer for the podcast because it's an amazing song. Has this beautiful sort of East meets West electronic component to it. And so we've been emailing with one of the managing licensing agents for this guy, Jai Wolf, who put together this music. And we started reaching out, and then we realized he was coming to Boise.
Which is like very random.
Just very
right?
random, very random. He's just happened to be in the knitting factory. So we had all these email communications, and I took the tabs to the concert. I went and just got a ticket and went to the concert. And side note, incredible concert, just absolutely amazing performance. The lights, the visuals, the sound, it was great. A lot of people in Boise came out, but he opened up his set first by putting a couple big screens on, talking about the difficulties of addiction and wanting to do surveys about addiction and depression, which spoke immediately to what we were working on and why we're trying to do this. Incredible set. Then afterwards, I hung out. I hung out. I was trying to communicate with the managers and would show it, and they were like, actually, we're not really sure there's a time here, whatever. But as a startup founder, I'm persistent. So after the show, I just went and hung out like around backstage, back where like the tour bus was. Like a real
groupie route.
I went the groupie route.
Say like a good groupie.
Like a good groupie. I hung out in the backstage for like an hour and a half, just like sitting out by the street. And finally he came out with a couple of his managers. And this was like midnight on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And so he comes out, and I come up to him and I say, this is the weirdest thing that's going to happen to you today. But, my name's Brad. I've been talking to one of your licensing agents about working with Indian Summer. We're building this mental health tool. Here are the tabs. And I show him the tabs. And he doesn't say a lot. He says, wow, that's pretty cool. And we were able to get some exposure, and he was able to use them, and his manager was there and also was able to try them. And then I left. But that's the hope. So that's the story of meeting Jai Wolf, and hopefully it will translate into us being able to use the song, so we can use this little clip right here. We can exit out with Indian Summer.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That'll be a great day.
Now you got to follow up and be like, okay, I know we've been trying to talk to you, but now you've actually seen the product.
Yeah, he's not going to forget the guy that was like standing in the alley with these. Also, the tabs work really well as a rave device.
Oh, right, because the colors.
The colors, and so
There you go.
I had them at the show and like going, and people were like, "What are those?" I was like, yeah, it's a mental health tool.
I think,
Get
Brad,
your own.
if I could just say that story just summarized my investment strategy. People who are willing to do whatever it takes for their dream, and that their dream is based in serving other people.
That's
You're
the
crushing
goal. Thanks.
May it be of service to people.
May we be of service to people.
Yes,
May
indeed.
we build things that help people.
Indeed.
Better future. All right.
Right.
That's a wrap.
I'm out.